Ederto, egunon guztioi, eta mila esker etortzeagatik gurera. Kafe baino lehenago izan dugu beta entzuteko Juan Luis Ibarrak magistratuak emandako hitzaldi interesgarria, eta orain berri batekin jarraituko dugu, baina kasu honetan unibertsitatetik datorren ponentzia da. Buenos días a todos, de nuevo. Hemos tenido la oportunidad de escuchar a una interesantísima charla del magistrado Juan Luis Ibarra antes del café, y ahora en estos momentos continuaremos con otra ponencia nueva, pero que en este caso procede de la universidad. Esta ponencia tiene ya de por sí parte con un título, yo diría que interesante, con un cierto halo de misterio. Es en inglés, como ya tienen ustedes los aparatos, y dice algo así como: con tantísima información, o el hecho de tener tantísima información en la inspección, eso es una posibilidad, de mejora, o es quizás un desafío para la inspección. Tenemos aquí a mi lado a los dos invitados ponentes que nos van a desvelar ese misterio. Tengo el placer de presentarles en el último extremo, en el extremo de la mesa, a Petros Pashiardis. Él es decano, es profesor y además doctor por la Universidad Abierta de Chipre. Y a mi lado está el profesor y doctor Stefan Brauckmann, de la Universidad de Austria de Alpen-Adria, en la especialidad de desarrollo y aseguramiento de la calidad. Ambos dos son especialistas, como decía, universitarios, y sobre todo su ámbito de trabajo procede de la evaluación de la función directiva, del liderazgo educativo y de la evaluación de los centros escolares. Si ustedes teclean en Internet sus nombres o las palabras clave que acabo de mencionar, verán que son unas autoridades muy significativas en estos campos y que sus obras y trabajos son mencionadas en la literatura científica más moderna en torno a estos ámbitos, y además también sus investigaciones son muy citadas en los informes de la OCDE y, por ejemplo, también de los informes de la Unión Europea en general. Por tanto, autoridades muy significativas. ¿Cómo llegamos nosotros a trabajar con ellos? La Inspección del País Vasco en el 2015 comenzó con un proyecto de Erasmus+, que lideró ella misma, nosotros desde la Inspección del País Vasco, y en aquel entonces trabajamos con 5 inspecciones europeas y 2 universidades europeas también, y fue entonces cuando tuvimos ocasión de comenzar a trabajar con ellos. Fruto de ese proyecto, publicamos 3 productos intelectuales que en parte son gracias a la implicación y a la colaboración de nuestros colegas europeos, y que si quieren acceder a ellos, no tienen más que entrar a nuestra página web de la Inspección del País Vasco y verán cómo fueron en aquel entonces en torno a la evaluación de la función directiva y de la práctica docente. No tengo más que agradecer a nuestros ponentes invitados de hoy, que siempre están listos y dispuestos cada vez que les llamamos para hacer cualquier tipo de colaboración. Ellos tienen una agenda apretadísima desde su labor de investigadores, docentes, son asesores también de sus respectivos ministerios de educación en sus respectivos países, y además dan charlas, ponencias sobre esos temas a lo largo y ancho del mundo. Siempre tienen un hueco para hacerlo a nosotros, y yo les quiero dar las gracias. Sin más, por último, recordarles que la ponencia que vamos a escuchar ahora va a durar en torno a 1 hora y 1 hora 30 minutos, que ustedes podrán intervenir y hacer preguntas cuando lo consideren. No tienen más que levantar la mano, pedir el micrófono inalámbrico y, en cualquier momento, porque sí que hemos estado comentando los ponentes y la organización que es un poquito larga la ponencia. Entonces, para que sea un poquito más interactiva, ustedes pueden parar cuando tengan una pregunta que hacer, una reflexión. Ellos encantados les van a responder a lo que requieran. Y, en todo caso, al final de la exposición dejaremos 30 minutos, ya veremos según vayamos viendo, para que más sosegadamente puedan formular cualquier tipo de reflexión o pregunta. Ya sería al final de todo. Posteriormente vendrá el responsable de audiovisuales para el tema del Twitter y de todas estas cosas, que también es importante a la hora de la publicidad del Congreso. Yo no tengo nada más que contar. Ahora ya les doy pie a mis compañeros. Petros, Stefan, it is a pleasure to have you here. we are very eager to listen to this mysterious title of your exposition. So whenever you want, your pleasure.
Okay, thank you.
Very warm welcome also from my side. I'm sure that everybody can see me, but can you hear me? Almost sure that you can see me. Okay. The talk is entitled Data Keep Falling on My Head, an Opportunity or a Challenge for the Inspectorate. And it might resonate with you guys, that we had something different in mind, that it reminds you probably of a song. I'm not singing, don't worry. I didn't come to sing, I came to present our latest findings. But maybe it reminds you of a song and we can talk, over lunch about that. So what we want to say...
Are you alluding to the fact that school inspectors are really being rain showered with lots of data on a daily basis?
Could be that it's some sort of data drowning effect right now, like raindrops keep falling on my head, and you have the impression that it's data here, data there, data almost everywhere, dripping on you. And what can you make, in order not to drown, but to work with data in a more productive way? What we want to say, it's a great pleasure and it's a great honor to talk to you guys. Honestly, I've never seen 400 inspectors in one room. And it's still to me hallucinating, because you're not only our object of research desire, in a good way, not sexual desire, object of desire, of a scientific desire.
What are you talking about?
So when do you have the chance actually to meet 400, experts, so to speak, in the field of the school inspectorate? And we try to make it really interactive, okay? We are not here like, made out of stone, moving like robots and doing like a 1 hour talk, 1 hour, 30 minutes. That's not the idea. We want to engage into a critical discussion with you as experts at an equal footing, if that's okay with you guys, okay? Right, so please feel free to jump in at any given moment in time. We are here for you. Okay, that's the idea. And he came from Cyprus, that was 10 hours. Me, it was 8 hours. We could have gone to Toronto at the same time, but we are glad to be
Stefan, if I
here.
may start from where you left it, I would like to also commend you. I have been to many conferences around the world. This is the first inspectors conference that is purely and clearly inspectors, not a mixture of school principals, inspectors, policymakers. And I think Spain is to be commended for doing that. I think it's a unique conference, and hopefully from what you will hear from us, it will be a different perspective. A lot of it may be some things that you're already thinking and theorizing about. So what we're hoping for is that you are into something new, something old, and something borrowed. And all three elements will be in our presentation. So please bear with us, because this is going to be a paradigm shift for you, from Spanish into German and Greek. Well, no, into English.
Okay. So data keep falling on my head, an opportunity or a challenge for the inspectorate. This is all about your relationship with data. Okay? You have come across a lot of data, right? So what is data to you? And you might ask yourself that question, Is it like you have the stance, without data, you're just another person with an opinion? Do you think that data is really helpful in order to stimulate development? Do you think there is good data and bad data? And do you think that data is really key when it comes to your profession? So I want you to think maybe throughout the whole talk about your relationship, data and you guys as inspectors. What does that relationship look like? You might think that data is fascinating and that data are even sexy, okay? Could be the case. I don't know if that's really widespread across that audience, but that's the idea. What's the relationship with data and you as inspectors? And we want to dig into it. And it's not only about bad use and good use of data. Petros, it's also...
Stefan, no. It's also about use and abuse of data. And we all know very well how to take data and make it mean different things to different people. And indeed, we're all very good at this. I'm sure you're very good at this as well. And we need to be careful about that, because data can be easily manipulated.
So in order to illustrate in a more humoristic way, we came across that sketch and we would like to share it with you. You see basically here before we start, and to speak it out loud, a gentleman and a policeman.
Stefan, when we do this, can you be the policeman? You're German.
I can do that.
Okay, please bear with us. Hey, I'm looking for my quarter that I dropped.
Did you drop it here?
No, I dropped it 2 blocks from the street.
Then why are you looking for it here?
Well, because the light is better here. Okay.
So I guess that's in a nutshell, one of the core problems, so to speak, that the data, is not well suited to the problem. Okay, so you might have a lot of data. The question is like whether the data helps you really solving a problem, and there can be so many problems actually at so many different levels. So you don't actually look for, maybe your car keys even or a quarter where you actually drop them, but you just go, where the light is better. So that's not the idea of evidence-based policy and evidence-based practice, right? So in order to talk about that, we structured our presentation in the following way. First of all, now that everybody is talking about data-based leadership, and we use rather the expression of data-informed leadership, because your leadership is not only based on data, it's based on so many other things. It's multifactorial. So why does it even matter? Why is everybody talking about data-based leadership those days? There are so many books now being published. So what was the starting point? Why does it even matter? Why did we come here to talk to you about that subject? Minds on, we would like to give you some theoretical framing, in order to embed the whole issue within the research literature. And then don't worry.
No, and in essence, what we know is going to come through yourselves as well. You've been inspectors, you are inspectors, and therefore you are knowledgeable about your art and craft. And that's where we would need your input. So that's when, as Stefan said, feel free to interrupt us. Please feel free to just do that if we see a hand, and you make some comment based on what we're saying.
Then it becomes more practical. After minds-on, it's hands-on. So what can we do? And we would like really to guide you through the process, how to deal with the data in a more productive way as inspectors, and what kind of implications does it have for you. So we want you to be not less fearful, because you're not fearful persons, you're inspectors, you don't know fear, but we want you... I also have to wait in order to see if there's a reaction with the translation.
They're with us.
Okay, so not being fearful, being more or less thrilled, about the idea of using data in a more productive way, but also in a very efficient and effective way. And then for us, what is important is like to have an ongoing discussion afterwards, like what should constitute our future conversation topics, between practitioners and researchers. What would you like to talk us about? What are your ideas, and where do you need maybe our help or our support, to tackle some issues? I guess that's the overall.
Yes, in essence, with the what can we do and combining the leadership aspect, we're looking at you as leaders, and probably that's how you look at yourselves, meaning that through data you will need to show the direction forward for the states within the Spanish territory or within the school systems in which you operate. So that's how we're going to be dealing with you and the data.
So data-informed leadership, why does it even matter? I guess what we can see in a lot of countries right now, and that's almost like a transnational effect when it comes to education policies, and maybe my Spanish allowed me during this morning to understand a little bit about the ongoing discussion on stage, that we have extensive changes in many school systems in Europe right now, putting more emphasis on new public management and evidence-based policy. And you might have heard some of the keywords, or the buzzwords, as we call them: effectiveness, equity, output orientation, accountability, data use, decentralization, and so on. If you want to reduce it to the max, and you want to explain to somebody over a pincho or a beer, or 2 pinchos and 2 beers, whatever your frequency is, then you can actually describe it pretty well with a quote from one of my beloved movies, Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. Thank you so much. If that does not work, you usually should leave the stage, but then really you.
Not yet.
Thank you so much. With great power comes great responsibility, meaning at the same time, you give more room for maneuvering to the school, but at the same time, you're going to help them more accountable. With great power comes great responsibility. That's the basic idea, so to speak, of new public management. So two sides of the same medal in terms of quality assurance and quality development, more autonomy, and at the same time, more accountability with regards to the output of the single school. So with great power comes great responsibility. You might phrase it like this. The 4 E's and the 1 S in our time: effectiveness, efficiency, evidence, success. That was not an E, that was an S.
Stefan, you left equity out. And
I guess
he usually
equity
does that because he comes from new public management, where the 3 E's are the most important. In education, however, equity is equally important.
What we mean here is really sometimes we forget that it's all about the child. We're talking about big policies, about what's going on, in what way we can change, the overall environment of the school, stimulating and stuff. But what is it all about in the core, in the center of the school? It's about the learning motivation and the learning outcomes, and to grow also as a person. Not only being centered on learning outcomes, but also to be centered on the single child. So the evidence-based approach kind of leaves out sometimes, that school is way more than just results, okay? Please don't be scared now by this steering cycle. Well, I guess everybody's familiar with PISA. Yeah? What does that acronym stand for? Do you know it?
Of course,
Program.
I think everybody
knows, of course. Everybody knows the acronym. Nobody knows what's actually behind the acronym. So, Program for International Student Assessment, right? And Spain did participate in PISA, in this large-scale assessment study. Did you do well? What would you say? So? I didn't want to talk to you now about, your PISA results, because in Germany we had shocking PISA results in 2001. It caused the PISA shock in my country, okay? We called it the PISA shock. It was really kind of dramatic. But what PISA showed, it was interesting. See, the assumption was, you give every school the same input, the same resources, the same rules and regulations, and you would expect that those schools would generate automatically the same output. And what PISA could show for the very first time, and that's, when there was some kind of systemic earthquake in my country, is you give every school the same resources, but they don't add up having the same results. And why is that so? Because there's still a black box which matters, and that's the process. So you give something into, a system, that's the input, but then it's going to be transformed at the process level. That's where all the action takes place. And that kind of transformation leads to the immediate output, and then, in terms of outcomes, to even longer effects. So the idea, same input, leads to the same output. That's just wrong. And you can say everything about PISA. I'm not a PISA fan, okay?
Oh, I am.
Yeah, sure, yeah. So it's not like we are PISA fans, but what really is important is we didn't know anything about the results of the schools and in what way actually they made wise use of the resources they were given.
In essence, systems theory, what tells us, the middle eclipse that Stefan alluded to, is really still like the black box. What are the processes that go inside that can produce differentiated results at the school level, which is of importance to us? In a nutshell, we could say that context matters. And that's what we have not been taken into consideration when we talk about school leadership, inspectorate, results. Context has been absent. And I think we need to put context back into the scene, the main arena. And in essence, the emphasis now, it used to be, and usually the world changes in the pendulum swing, goes from one end to the other. The emphasis used to be inputs, on the inputs, a little bit on the processes, almost none on the product, sorry for using the word product, on the output. Now, the emphasis has shifted worldwide from inputs and processes into the outputs. And again, then, as the great Greek philosopher taught us, wisdom is in the middle. Not one extreme, not the other extreme. Wisdom is really bringing the two together. And I think we will culminate to that, but we're still not at that stage. The stage we're in is still now the emphasis on the outputs and outcomes of the school systems.
So please keep in mind the word output or result-oriented steering and management.
And then, in essence, we have multinational organizations or international organizations, in essence, telling us what is educational policy. And look what kind of organizations. We have the IMF, the OECD, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization. All those are economic associations worldwide. Yet, with the policies they implement, they do have a huge influence on the education arena. Now, some people may think this is wrong, okay? Because it's the it's the instrumentalization of education that we live in now. And maybe that's a bit dangerous because we're moving away from pedia, what we call pedia in Greek, or Bildung in German. We try to combine our two languages, meaning that nowadays we're probably moving away from educating the whole person as a cultured citizen of the world of today, and instead we're moving into the marketization and the work area where we need to produce good workers, or people for the economy. And that really always brings a schism and conflict within educators' mind. And I think we should have in mind these issues as we proceed further on.
So when we talk about data-based leadership, what it means is also data-driven decision-making. You as leaders, and we treat you as leaders because you're not only controllers, you are leaders. You help to lead the organization, so to speak, as co-leaders, just from a different perspective between the macro and the micro level. So data-driven decision-making, the data will never substitute the decision. Data is the data, but the decision which needs to be made based on the data, it's going to be yours. And you have to live with the consequences, so to speak, of your decision, with the intended effects as well as with the unintended effects of your decisions. And that's what it means to be a leader, also as an inspector. You have to be up, to the consequences of the decisions. The problem why we have so many vacancies right now all across Europe when it comes to school leadership positions, not only in Austria, not only in Germany, not only in Cyprus, is that people are not up actually to make decisions anymore, okay? Because then you have to stick to that decision and say, like, that was my decision and I have to live also with the consequences, but it was my decision. So data will never substitute the decision, it will not replace the decision. It's just one ingredient which goes into the decision-making processes, among others.
But in essence, what Stefan was saying, if I may compliment, you cannot avoid making decisions. You are at a leadership position as a school inspectorate or as the school leaders, therefore you have to make decisions. And let's hope that they're data-driven and not just, I have a gut feeling, or I think so, or my intuition tells me, etc.
So when we talked actually yesterday to our lovely colleagues from Portugal, Elinor and Helder, so we talked about...
They will be speaking tomorrow.
They will be speaking tomorrow. So this is like spoiler alert, like little trailer. We're looking forward to that one. We were wondering, we have like always an understanding of what a good school is or what good teaching is. Do we have an understanding of what a good inspector is? So I was always wondering, there was one attempt in Germany to come up with a framework, of what makes a good inspector, with all the actions and indicators, like performance standards for school inspectors. And I was wondering, because it's my first time, so to speak, to Spain, coming to this beautiful conference, if you have such a thing like performance standards, or quality framework for inspectors. Because we have usually quality frameworks. I mean, we do have them back in Germany for the single school. So what makes a good school? What makes good teaching? But it might be a good question to be discussed. What makes a good inspector? What makes a high quality inspector? So that would speak in favor of performance standards also for the school inspection, have that kind of framework. And I guess that's what like I'm going to skip it, evaluating results. It might be interesting during the discussion if you could tell us what kind of national exams you do have, on what kind of data you can rely, also when you do the school inspections. But what becomes more and more important for school inspectors, and that's why you're saying you are leaders, you're not only controllers, is that you have to communicate the results, okay, to actors at various system levels to motivate, orient, and legitimate developmental activities. So from being a controller to become a developer, a critical friend of the school in order to guide the process, because what's happening once the school inspector has left the school? What are the follow-up activities in Spain? Good question when it comes to quality assurance and quality development. How are you giving feedback? So what is this new school inspections all about? It's more like service-oriented, it's supportive, okay? It's like a co-leader. My question here is, well, if you want to change somebody's business, okay, and you talk to school inspectors, then if I was a school inspector, I would say, well, if you want to change my business, get to know my business. Okay? What do we know about how much time you spend on different tasks? Within your family, maybe your husband knows what you're doing, maybe. Maybe your wife knows what you're doing, maybe. But if you ask people on the street, what is a school inspector doing day in, day out? Do you think you would get like a valid answer? Do they have an idea what you are doing? Or maybe it's like that, how people sometimes imagine somebody.
That's your Kafka moment.
So if it's like being only an administrator, like a blind executioner, so to speak, of rules and regulation, that's not your profession. You do way more than this. Sometimes I got the impression they look like you are some monster out of a Kafka novel, okay? Bureaucracy, soulless, breaking down somebody, processing a demand. But that's not the idea, right? I mean, I see a lot of human beings, not only inspectors, so it might be an idea always to show more like the human face of a school inspectorate, because that's what it's all about. They should to get to know your profession, what you are doing. I guess they have weird perceptions of what you are doing. See, like I'm doing leadership research, they had also weird perception of what a school principal is doing day in, day out. So maybe they know even less what you guys as school inspectors are doing. So I would opt, if I can come up with a suggestion here, maybe we should need more task analysis with regards to your profession in order to understand better how much time you spend on different task areas and what are the biggest stressors in your profession. And I guess in Spain, we need that kind of empirical analysis, because we have a lot of assumptions about what school inspectors do. We have basically no empirical findings in order to describe what they are actually doing. We had a lot of prescriptions. We don't have descriptions based on data. So I guess that's what we need in order to have a better understanding what you've been doing already, okay, and what might be new now with the new role of the inspectorate. So maybe this as a national approach could be one idea. Beto.
Do I move on?
Yeah.
Oh, that's why you left it there. Well, having thought that, what happens when the inspector rings twice? Oh, you are laughing. So
it worked.
It's nice to see
we were a
some
little bit worried,
laughter.
to be honest.
Well, what do we know? Are we changing roles? That's what happens when you make teamwork. Do I want to do this? That's what you have to ask yourselves. Then, can I do this? Do you have the competences that are required, as Stefan asked before, about what an inspector really does? So, can I really do this? Am I up for the job? Then, am I allowed to do this? As we know, before a magistrate, a judge talked in front of you. So, is it about the interpretation of the law? Maybe narrow interpretation, maybe a broader interpretation of the law. To what extent? And then, do I have to do this no matter what? Like whether I want to or not, I'm an inspector, so I have to act as an inspector. And then going back, is that what you learned about an inspector being? You know, the posture, and then serious with a tie, just like I'm looking now, or getting in, you know, like a good family, and then we're here all together to improve the school and the school system. I don't know what is being taught here, or what is being told for inspectors in the Spanish territory, but in Cyprus, certainly the idea is that you come in as a very serious person, and that you're here to control, to advise, and then to say, but this is the educational policy of the country or of the island, and this is what you need to be doing. I don't know if that's the situation in Spain.
Petro, maybe you can tell the story what happened to one teacher when a specific school inspector...
Oh, but that was years ago. But indeed, there was a notorious inspector in Cyprus in the 80s, mid-80s. And then the teacher, she was pregnant, and she heard that inspector was coming. And then she was rushed in the hospital and gave birth. Thank God it was all okay. But they say, the saying goes since then, that it was because of the fear of the inspector. You know. So I hope anyways the situation here in Spain is not the same. So in essence, what is the role of leadership? I mean, I deal with leadership. Sorry, I didn't give you enough time. Yeah, maybe the translator. You know, I speak, then the interpreter needs to say something to you, and then you laugh. So it's like a lapse of time. So I have to learn to wait for that. So the role of leadership now, this comes from a very good friend of ours. He's German-American, working in California.
UC Berkeley.
Where?
UC Berkeley.
University of California, Berkeley. And this also resonates with our own philosophy about leadership. So what are you up to? What is your job really? It's to provide the structural prerequisites for those data teams to be formed at the school level. Then it is really about acquiring and spreading data literacy. When we get tons of data, are you sure that the teachers, the school leaders, are able to translate and be informed by the data? That means sense-making, which is the most important aspect. If they're not, then you as inspectors, it is your duty really to inform people and tell them how they can make sense out of data. In essence, can data tell us what is good teaching, what is effective teaching, or is it just a feeling? I think that by now we have a lot of data, research data, worldwide, that can tell us almost with exactness who is a very effective teacher and who is not. But we will get back to that later on in the presentation. So, communicating clear expectations that data need to be used, and teachers and school principals need to learn how to use those data. And then monitoring performance based on testing, either statewide testing or school-wide testing. And last but not least, creating indeed a climate of trust and learning. Trust, ladies and gentlemen, is the foundation that we keep finding in any piece of research. Unless teachers and school principals trust you, they will not listen to you. Trust is the foundational basis on which to exercise your inspectorial duties. And then?
So certainly, we don't want this to happen, okay? This should not become the working place of your future. So we don't want to go here into extremes, you know, that it's only about data here, data there, data everywhere. This looks like being a stockbroker, okay, at Wall Street, you know? You're just running the data, you're extracting the necessary information and so on. That's not the idea, that's not your job, and we are aware of that. And we don't want you to become stockbrokers or data analysts, day in, day out, okay? But if we move on, the problem is, data are neat, reality is messy, especially the social reality within a school system or within the system school. So what I want you to keep in mind is drip, okay? You see it in parentheses, first bullet point. We have a very data-rich environment. We have lots of data, but does more data mean necessarily better data, or does more data lead to more decision? I mean, if you have more information about a product, you go to the supermarket, you want to buy something, and I enrich, the level of information you have once you want to buy a product, does it take you longer to make a decision? Is that helpful to have that extent of information? So data-rich, information-poor means like we have to translate data into information, because the data is not the information. They are not automatically useful, and they are not by itself irrelevant information, okay? So more data does not necessarily mean better data. So we need to differentiate now. Can I ask you for that? Just change it.
Yeah. I think you can control that better. Okay.
So what we have here, what we see is a conceptual framework of data-driven decision-making in education from March 2006. This is the notion of school as a multi-level system. You have at the macro level the district, that's where you guys are operating. Then you have the educational institution, in your case the single school. And then you have the micro, that's what's taking, what's going on inside the classroom also in terms of interactions, okay? Now, I told you there's different types of data. Do you remember the steering cycle? Input, process, output? This steering cycle, maybe some of you guys remember. So we were differentiating between input, process, and outcome. So we have accordingly now three types of data, okay? I guess that's clear. From at the district level, at the single school level, at the classroom level. Now what is happening, and this is where the translation comes into the play, you need to translate the types of data into an information. The information is not actionable knowledge. So there needs to be another step in order to translate that information into actionable knowledge. So it's way more complicated when it comes to data, because the data itself is not really helpful. It needs to be translated into information, and the information needs to become actionable knowledge, for those people in schools. And then, of course, there are types of decisions associated with it, because you need to know if you want to evaluate practices, if you want to address an individual need, like one teacher, male or female, or maybe a group, or maybe a subject, or if you want to reallocate resources in reaction to outcomes. I mean, that would be like performance-based salary, performance pay, or anything of that sort. Okay, so please keep in mind, types of data can become an information can become actionable knowledge, but then what is the function, so to speak, of that kind of actionable knowledge? You have different kinds of data, you know that, input, process, output. Could be at the system level, PISA. I guess you're also familiar with TIMSS, PEARLS, any kinds of large-scale assessments. You have, when you come into the play, also data at the school level when it comes to the external evaluation of schools. And what Petro will talk about later is the kind of data you can collect and analyze in the classroom. And that when it comes to classroom observation, based on an observation sheet.
I may add on this for the classroom observation, which we go in depth. There's no substitute, and I say this with emphasis, there's no substitute to collecting data about excellence in teaching than observation in the classroom, okay?
The Holy Three, we talked about this macro, meso, micro, but we can skip that. Just a side note, of course, we're gonna share the slides with the audience, okay? Because I know people taking notes, I don't want you to, keep on taking notes, but in case you're interested, we would like to share the slides with you, okay, right after the conference. And maybe, Nekane, maybe there's a, okay. Maybe there is a chance, to put them somewhere online.
That will be the opportunity.
Okay.
We will share, as Stefan said, we will share these slides if you're interested. Once we rework them a bit, with the references and everything that needs to be scientifically, as a final product. In essence, or to sum up, with what Stefan was showing in that model, the decision-making model based on data, it means, to sum it up again, manipulating, aggregating, or disaggregating the desired data that we have in order to reach the right conclusions, and then at the same time making sure that people who are reading those data are able to understand, translate the data into actions and what really the data is telling us. That is all for receiving immediate feedback, meaning that when feedback is given, it has to be connected with the actual actions or demonstrations we have seen at the school level, okay? And then make connections between the assessments and the actual teaching and learning, the instruction that takes place at the school place. Because, ladies and gentlemen, teaching and learning is the essence, the heart and essence of why schools exist. And therefore, we must not lose sight of that. So what we are after as Inspectorate is really to improve the teaching and learning that takes place into our schools.
So if you cannot make plausible to teachers, why it should matter for their professional as well as personal development, and in what way students can benefit from that kind of data, they wouldn't even listen to you. Okay, so just try to make the connection to the classroom, because that's where the bumping heart of every pedagogue is. Not necessarily at the organizational level, but maybe at the classroom level, with all the flaws also being connected.
And then, with this kind of usage of data, that's when, indeed, you move from novice to expert. And then think maybe where you, as school inspectors, are within this kind of gradient between a novice on data use and then an expert on data usage. Novices, usually, to just sum it up very briefly, are with no practical experience, and then they're dependent mainly on rules and regulations, because that's your safety net, okay? However, you, as the inspectorate, the knowledgeable inspectorate of the Spanish state, need to move away from that, go through those stages, and then read the expert stage, where you really understand the context, macro, meso, micro, in which you operate, and then translate and interpret those rules and regulations about the inspectorate and evaluation of the schools, of teachers within your country, in order to make them actions, and then you are really experts. So an expert is when really you take the letter of the law, of the rule, of the regulation, and then translate it into real meanings for human beings and for school systems. The novice, and some of us, I'm including myself, will always stay at the first stage, unfortunately. Some of us will move and become, with limited experience, more analytical. Some of us will become experts. It's up to you which stage you will progress.
Any experts in the room so far? Would you like to raise your hand if you're an expert? Okay, you want me to skip that? Okay. Okay, you can think about it, That's a big challenge anyways, to do this.
In essence, let's move to the next slide. What you are going to be dealing with, or what you're dealing with on a daily basis. Not so fast.
Hello.
Let me take control of that, Stefan.
We have to do it there. Wait.
Oh, it's... okay. Now, that's what happens. I thought he was doing it on purpose. That's what happens when we work together as teams. But I guess, as I said, trust is the foundation of groups and working relationships. So I trust he knows what he's doing. Let's stop there. So, what you're dealing with is really those kinds of data. Very important. Summative data, and I'll be really in a nutshell, in summary form. Summary data is when you really decide for life or death, when you make final decisions about something. It works, it doesn't work, and I'm putting it really bluntly. Formative data and summative data is threatening to teachers and schools. Formative data is developmental, it's diagnostic, it's formative. It's when you want to improve the processes, the results, the attitudes. So that's friendly, that's not threatening. And maybe the inspectorates worldwide should be dealing more with formative data, non-threatening data. Then you need to have into consideration the context. So you need contextual data. And as Stefan put it in an article which he wrote recently with Alexander Schwartz, ACTS is the other acronym you should remember. ACTS, ACTS, area close to school. Always look not just at the context at the macro level where the inspectorate is dealing, but look at the context at the immediate level of the school. And then we need to be dealing with both quantitative and qualitative data. Or as we recently heard in America, how was it? Quant and qual. You know, Americans love these shortened acronyms. So recently in a conference, we heard quant and qual data. Meaning, as I usually tell my students when I deal with inspectorates and school evaluations, ladies and gentlemen, it is really about when you want quantitative data, it is the ability to generalize to larger sets of population, schools, etc. Qualitative is really when you want to learn the essence of things, when you really want to know how things work and how they're done.
Maybe just as a reminder, if you want to explain to somebody quite quickly, you know, the difference between formative and summative when it comes to evaluation. I guess some of you guys are cooking. Did you cook in your life? Yeah, you did? Okay. So when the cook tastes the soup, it's formative. When the guest tastes the soup, it's... Exactly. It's summative, okay? Formative, meaning formare, Latin, you can still change something. So if I get feedback in the middle of a seminar, okay? First time, okay? Half time. And they give me feedback, I can still change something. When it's summative, in the end, you know, maybe the next generation of students might benefit from the next semester. So the cook tastes the soup, formative. The guest tastes the soup. Okay, back to the kitchen. Gone, you know, no chance to change anything. Okay. So how do school inspections work? And do they work differently in different countries? This is from David Kemmethofer et al. From 2017. David Kemmethofer is working extensively with Herbert Altrichter. You can call him, you know, really like the Pope of school inspection research, at least in the German-speaking world. And they did make a nice figure when it comes to the different contexts within school inspectors are operating. Here you have a high-stakes environment, and here you have a low-stakes environment. Petros, would you like to tell them what is a high-stakes environment?
An example of what, when we say a high-stakes environment, is England or the Netherlands. An example of low-stakes environment is my own country, Cyprus.
And Austria.
And Austria, yeah. And even Germany, I might say.
Yeah.
So you see what happens in this diagram. If you're a high-stakes country, well, the tendency is to have benchmarks, accountability pressure from the inspectorate or from the outside, mechanisms of hierarchical control, etc. When you're at the low-stakes environment, meaning that there's no statewide testing or formalized nationwide testing, etc., then the emphasis is really on the far end there on rational insight. So it's my gut feeling. I think so, I feel, or I have this feeling that this is working or not. It tends to be a supportive context, a self-regulatory context, like in essence the system tells them, do whatever you think is better for you, but nobody then checks on it, is it really working or not? So, and they provide meaningful, not so meaningful information, all. So both high and low stakes on the line there, they are about target setting, so there are goals, either in high or low stakes testing. There is control, to some extent, more or less, and then they provide meaningful information. So you decide then for the Spanish state or the different states within the Spanish, within Spain, whether you are low or high stakes testing and which way you want to move.
Or maybe in the middle, like Sweden, you know, and countries on the way,
Sweden is more or less in the middle
to become
line.
a high-stake even environment. So it might be interesting to know more about the Spanish context or the context within your, so to speak, natural habitat, to know if there are any market mechanisms. Are schools competing for students nowadays in certain areas in Spain, in some provinces? Do you have a high level of accountability towards the school, you know, and what does it mean? That would be nice if you could share that with us, you know, maybe during the conversation, to know more about your system and to be more knowledgeable in the future.
In essence, from a researcher's point of view, it is mixed results really that you get when you have high stakes accountability systems or low stakes. It doesn't mean one is better than the other. The research really is mixed on that. So again, I guess middle of the road approach is a safer way to move towards. Okay, not too much accountability or too stringent on those issues as England is, for example, but at the same time not so relaxed, you know, like anything goes, everything goes. I guess somewhere in the middle is usually the truth. And then those kinds of findings you can read on your own, because those are some key points that we say findings, summarize them, okay, that we will not have much time to go into this in the presentation, but you can read them when you have the presentation. However, it is good to stay a bit longer on the inside, okay? It describes an actor's personal attitude, and personal attitudes cannot always turn themselves into scientific knowledge or data-driven knowledge. The feelings, that characteristics and results of the inspectorate stimulate the cognitive and evaluative processes within the school system. And then the stimulation leads to engagement in school improvement and evaluation. Not so sure about that. So school inspection may promote development through increasing the insight into developmental needs and options. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. So insight is a good advice, but not good enough advice.
I guess the main question here remains, what is actually happening when school inspectors are coming to the school? You know, what is happening actually once you know, and you remember when we said, like, what is happening when the school inspector rings twice? Okay? Female, male, school inspector rings twice. What we know from research is that the really interesting part is happening actually beforehand. That's not usually when the school inspectors have come to the school. Just you know they are coming. You know they are coming to you. And what are you doing then? All of a sudden, do we have a paper here? Do you have something about quality insurance? Can you give me your didactic training, you know, of last month? All of a sudden, there's a collective approach in the organization. First of all, it's not me and my classroom. All of a sudden, it's about we and our school. Okay, that didn't work. Okay, that was next time it will work. So it's not about me and my classroom. It's about we and our school. All of a sudden, the educational institution comes into the play because we are all in this together. So it's really interesting that most of the innovative stuff is happening before your guys are actually there. And it might be interesting to know more about what is actually happening once it's been indicated they are coming to you. They are on their way. So, and then all of a sudden, all kinds of actions take place in a more systematic, more structured, sometimes less structured way. But that's interesting, right? To know more about this, what's happening in those schools. I mean, no researcher has ever been there, you know, during that kind of really interesting period. And at the same time, to know more about, I talked about this, what is happening once you have left? Is there a quality development manager taking over? What do you say? Yes? No? Sir? You don't know, right? Is there a quality development manager coming once you have left the school? Do you give a voucher to a consultancy company? No? Okay. So maybe it might be nice to have your ideas, what's actually happening in terms of follow-up activities. And I don't mean we come back in 2 years. okay? Or in 4 or 5 or whatever your frequency might look like. So that's an interesting idea. What is happening beforehand might be really interesting. And then actually what is happening once you have left? I have no idea. We don't know anything about the follow-up activities. I mean, I hope there are some, but you can tell me later during the discussion. All right.
Hands-on.
There we go.
Yeah, move that. And we stay there. I think I will take over. I can control this better when I'm speaking mostly. So, ladies and gentlemen, the educational organizations, we're talking about schools. So, what are they supposed to be doing? Update their content. Become learning organizations. That's a buzzword for nowadays. Research is like fashion. It moves like with nice buzzwords nowadays. Becoming learning organizations, you probably have heard it as well as learning communities, professional learning communities. It's the buzzword of nowadays. We'll see what comes next, or we'll tell you what we think will come next towards the end. And then deliver measurable outcomes. That is really what we're all about. And I will try to give some examples from Cyprus, not the best example when it comes to the inspectors and the inspectorate, okay? But I will tell you what we've been trying to do. In essence, we tried to create an internal evaluation system for the school's improvement, as well as an external. I guess what happens in most countries, and I know it's happening in the Basque country that I know better through our inspector friends here, and I'm sure in other states, in other parts of Spain. And then we have the external evaluations of schools in Cyprus, which is proposed in a sense, copy and paste to some extent from what's happening with the Ofsted inspections, okay? Some constraints, however, we need to be entering a truly genuine dialogue in order to make things happen. We need to have multi-perspectivity and have that in mind, meaning that there's different audiences. There's the parents and guardians, there's the students, there's the teachers, there's the school leaders, okay? And those may be having conflicting interests. And then we have time and financial constraints that we need to be aware and put the students center stage. Because, and please, I want you to remember that, schools exist because students need to learn and not because teachers need to be employed. I think that's very important to have in mind, especially you as the inspectorate, and keep reminding the teachers and school leaders when you visit their schools. When we go about, now I'm going to talk about the school level and then try to enter the classroom. Okay, so please bear with me. For the school level, when we say school level evaluation, we mean mainly 3 different kinds of models. One model is the goals model, meaning that you go to evaluate a school according to their expressed goals, how they're written, and then operationalized effectiveness is the degree to which goals are achieved. There is, however, a lot of criticism. I will not go into this now. However, the main criticism is that maybe the goals of the school are not really those that should be, meaning the operational goals are not those that should be the educational goals. And therefore, there's conflicting messages and contradicting messages, actually. Then there's the second model, the model of systemic resources. You evaluate that a school is a good school, whether they are able to acquire more resources from their environment. The Parents Association give them more computers, more televisions, more copiers, whatever they need. They are acquiring more and more resources, and we say, oh, that's a good school. So that's the second model, okay? Again, the criticism is this one. There may be goals displacement, meaning the goal of a school's existence is teaching and learning, not to acquire more resources. And then the third model that we usually utilize to evaluate schools is what we call a combination model. That is the extent to which they can really fulfill their goals and the extent, please look at the colored area, the extent to which they have academic achievement, that means the students, the extent to which they have job satisfaction, that means the school teachers and the school principals, and the perceptions about effectiveness of the school organization, which means parents and the external societal environment in which the school exists. Those three types of school evaluation are used in various different parts of the world. Now, what you want to do here in Spain is up to you in your individual areas of where you come from. And then the main caveat is, please remember, when we're talking about school evaluation processes, setting minimum standards is not a good idea. Think about that. When you say usually, I'm setting the minimum that everybody needs to reach, minima become maxima, and that's dangerous. Usually people are happy by achieving the minima. So a more rational approach is, to my view, the value-added process. What's your departure? What's your point of departure? And then take it forward. A second caveat, a second thing for thought, is take fear. You're the inspectorate. People may be fearful of you. Take fear away. Tell them that to make mistakes is human. It's okay. However, what I tell my colleagues as well, please don't make the same mistake twice. I don't like it. Okay? But a mistake is a learning opportunity. And third caveat, throw down the walls and encourage group and synergistic organization and work. Having team keynotes is really rarity. Me and Stefan, we tried to do that several times so far in our careers, and we think it's more successful than me talking by myself or him talking by himself. I think it's better for the audience, but then in the end, you are to be the judges for this. Then, the evaluation system for improving school effectiveness is really the summary of what we said. Then, this is a very simple diagram. It looks complex, but it is not. For our friends from the previous project in the EOS lab, we showed that one, and that may look more familiar to you. But this is more plain. It's what we developed, myself and Stefan, 10 years ago, and we're still validating it. In essence, trying to take into consideration that far end, the context, okay? And then what we ought to be looking when we look at schools, this model we developed from a school leader's perspective, meaning successful and effective school leaders really operate based on those 5 leadership styles, meaning the instructional style.
The red. It's highlighted in red. You push it.
Okay. Sorry, I was pressing the wrong button.
It's good about
That's why
teamwork.
we're a team, Stefan. So we have the instructional leadership style, the pedagogical. In Europe, it's better. Instructional is the American term. We have the participatory. Instructional is the extent to which school leaders are risk takers and encourage their teachers to be risk takers in implementing different teaching approaches, and having pedagogical dialogues in order to improve teaching. Participative is the extent to which a school is participatory in its approaches, as opposed to I'm the leader, I'm the inspector, I take charge. Then personnel development is the extent to which school leaders try to involve their teaching staff in professional development activities. The structuring is the extent to which there are rules, regulations, and they are implemented fairly and squarely for everybody. And then the entrepreneurial leadership style is when school leadership looks outside in order to bring help inside. In essence, operating under the dictum of today, do more with less and do it better. That's what you ought to be doing. So we utilize that in Cyprus, or we're trying to utilize that, as the 5 areas for school evaluation, meaning when the inspectorate comes in, they can look at the pedagogical processes, at how participatory the school is, how much this school is inventing in professional development of its teaching staff, how much the rules and regulations are being adhered to, the safety of the school environment, and to what extent they are really calling outsiders to bring help inside. And some of the tools we developed, I'm not going to tire you with those, but we developed some of those tools. I think some of the Spanish countries, states have their own tools as well. And meaning for us what's important is when we have indicators, there's about 40 for the self-evaluation of the school. It's been translated in English. If some of you are interested, I can send it to you if you send me an email. What is very interesting for us is really to give possible sources, different possible sources for the school evaluation. And then based on those, you develop the action plans, meaning what are the actions to be taken, the objectives, the time frame, and the resources needed, okay? And then some of the tools, again, I will not go into detail with those, but we develop tools of students evaluating their teachers, teachers evaluating their school leaders, and then think of tools that teachers and school principals can be evaluating their inspectors. I think there's a call for this. I don't know if it's done, but I think we should be doing it.
It exists actually in Germany. We have this kind of self-evaluation system right now. So we have like the school supervision authorities, the school leaders, the teachers, and the students. And it's one self-evaluation reporting system. This is not compulsory. This is actually, you can do it, it's facultative. But I guess like it's a nice way to do it that you don't leave somebody out, okay? So it's also about, it's for school inspectors, it's for school leaders, it's for teachers, and it's for students. And it's for free. It's actually a service which is provided by a quality agency, you know? So, I mean, that might be an idea to come up also with the idea of a self-evaluation report system. You're not being binding, but, you know, maybe together data which is really helpful because it looks at the interlinkages, you know, between the different actors. And if I can tell you that, what is so complicated when Petro is laying out the argument for more goals, it's actually pretty hard for schools to come up with goals. If you ask your school, you know, as an inspector, what are your goals for the future? What does your school stand for? Just, you know, give me 3 sentences, you know? What makes that school so special compared to school X or Y? They have a hard time actually coming up with those goals. So it's not like they have those goals ready-made. Apparently, schools are really struggling with coming up, you know, with goals and to prioritize the goals. Even in a finding which we know from the research on school profiles and school programs in the 80s, it's like schools think that they have certain problems, and then you can question if those are really the problems of the school, you know, coming as an external inspector. But the problem is, the problems do not match the goals do not match the measures, and they have no idea how to measure if the measures have been really successful in reaching the aims, okay? Wrong problems lead to wrong goals to wrong measures, and then no idea of how to measure if they have been really successful. I mean, that's really chaotic, right? But that's what's happening in schools. Also in Austria, they have a hard time to come up with solid goals because maybe you as school inspectors could help them actually to be like an external critical friend to have an alignment of perceptions when it comes to the main problem areas of the school. Because maybe the school is just wrong when it comes to their own problems. Just because it's their problems, possessive pronoun, doesn't mean that they are the right ones, okay? And that they're the only one having the right actually to tell, because it's their problems, they're even more important, they are mine, and they have to be the only which are relevant for our reality. And that's actually what's happening in Portugal, as I learned yesterday, and that's what we're doing in Germany more and more, alignment of perception when it comes to the main challenges at the single school level. I guess that's really where school inspectors come into the play and are so precious when it comes to that, to stimulate that kind of development. Okay, so find the right problems define the right goals, subset of measures, and have ideas about what kind of indicators we can use in terms of data in order to measure the effectiveness and to see if we have really reached our goals. Okay, I'm sorry, Petro, it was a little bit longer.
No, that's fine. In essence, ladies and gentlemen, indeed, we need to have the principle in mind, the main evaluation principle, that those who evaluate need to be evaluated. So it is a mutual process, and we need to accept that. So if you are evaluating teachers and schools need to be evaluating the inspectorate as well, so that you get both formative and summative feedback. And then the main issue is really multiple sources of data. One person or one group is not good enough. It has to be multiple sources of data, depending if it's for professional development of the teachers, then those three are possible sources of data: the pedagogical leader or school principal, the teacher himself or herself, and of course the students. Indeed, ladies and gentlemen, we have done research in many parts of the world. Students are very valid and reliable source of information about the quality of teaching they're receiving. Even at the kindergarten, we've done work at kindergarten with 3- and 4-year-olds. They're very valid and reliable observers of good teaching. And then it's the evaluation, and evaluation of the school or for promotion, different sources for different purposes. Let's move into the classroom. I think that's one of my favorite parts, because indeed the most important part of an education system is the single classroom. That's where things are happening. And indeed, I think it's a beauty to be able to look into that. I'm sure that you as inspectors, I'm not producing any light into you of what you already do, but I would like to stick with you with 3 slides. The first slide is, why is it necessary to have classroom observation? And it's your job, before we go into this, I'll take it back. It's your job as the school inspectorate to convince teachers, whenever they have some free time, to walk into each other's classrooms and observe and analyze each other. But teach them 2 preconditions in order to walk into a classroom. First precondition, we need to be trained. So we need to be trained as observers. Second precondition, we need to have valid and reliable instruments, tools that help us observe, either wide-angle observation or focused observation, whatever the teacher needs, but it has to be, those 2 are the main prerequisites. And it's up to you as the inspectorate to encourage this kind of culture within your schools in order for teachers, not just school principals or other inspectors, to enter into each other's classroom and try to make sense of what they see. What are the benefits? You establish collegial relationships. You become a realist of what to expect in a classroom. You provide direction, like, if I were you, the teacher, I would do this differently. And then you give them some more ideas to establish self-confidence, release enthusiasm, and develop flexibility, and then increase the self-efficacy of the teachers. Self-efficacy is a big issue nowadays in our kind of research. You need to be able, as the inspectorate, to increase the self-efficacy of the teachers. 2 simple ways. If a teacher tells you, you tell them something and they say, oh, it's the worst children of the school, or it's the environment, it's this and that, 20, okay, then their self-efficacy is very low. It means their locus of control is external. Everybody is to be blamed except myself. I'm perfect. The teacher starts improving when they have an internal locus of control, when they are convinced that some things are within their reach. And then the first thing they ask is, what did I do wrong? And my students are not learning, etc. Then I can almost guarantee you that if all your teachers include in their teaching those 5 main key actions or characteristics, they will do effective teaching. We don't have time to go individually into each of those. However, a lesson needs to be characterized by clarity, clear language. If I'm teaching in English, I have to be a good English speaker. If I speak in Spanish and I teach in Spanish, I have to be professional in Spanish. Variety, boring. You don't want your students to be bored. Therefore, good teaching, effective teaching, needs to be characterized by a variety. There's no research worldwide to show us that one method is better than the other. That's what some gurus are saying. However, there's a lot of research to show that variety in our teaching approaches is more effective. Then, dedication on the teaching tasks. Simply put, don't waste students' time. Do your teaching. Focus on the learning process. And then every student to be given a satisfactory degree of feeling good in your classroom, meaning differentiation of instruction and of testing. We could really have a 3-hour workshop on those issues alone, okay? Then this comes from a book that we wrote in Greek with my wife maybe about 20 years ago, where we say, in a nutshell, what is the best teachers? They discover, their personal goal of why they are into teaching. Not because Stefan says so or I say so, but because I want to be in the classroom as a teacher. They are also those people who are cognizant about their own behaviors. So, huge process of self-introspection. Then they have flow. Like now, me and Stefan, we rehearse this a lot. However, hopefully it looks natural to you, like it has flow. Try to have an influence on their students when they're in the third stage of their maturity. So teachers go through a first stage of maturity, second stage, and third. Simply put, first stage of maturity is when I just want to survive the classroom. Nobody gets hurt. Second stage of maturity is when I'm the best teacher. I don't care whether you learn or not. Move behind that as well. Reach the third stage of maturity where not only you want to survive the classroom period, not only you're the best teacher, but then you care about the impact you have on your students. What does it mean for them that I'm their teacher? Then you become a leader of leaders. Where do we go from here, Stefan?
I can take this.
Okay.
Here. So once again, why are we talking about data-informed leadership and not data-based leadership? Because data can inform decisions, but they cannot be the substitute for the decision. It's not ever a data-based leadership, so you won't find data-based, you will find more and more data-informed. It can inform you in one way or the other, but it's not the base. You know, just imagine like a policy soup, okay? Once again, I'm the cook, okay? We have that policy soup, no. And then some ingredients, okay? Some data are the ingredients, you know, and like pepperoni or whatever, I just put them in, but they are one ingredient of the policy soup, okay? Don't get ideas. I'm not getting ideas as a young professor that my research is going to change the way of political decision-making in the Basque country, okay? Because of that talk, you know, or because of whatever, you know, Spanish researchers might find out. So we have to be realistic. So what are we after? I mean, certainly what we see more and more, and it reminds me of Don Quixote, is like that leadership becomes a substitute for almost everything. Everything becomes now a leadership problem, you know, and a challenge for the leaders, you know, in our system. And I guess like that's wrong, because what you need to do if you want to really exercise data-informed leadership, there's management to it and there's administration to it. And it's not like you can leave it all behind and say like now it's all about leadership, because if you want to work with data, you need to collect them. You need to organize the data collection process. You need to analyze them. You need to synthesize them. You need to prioritize them. All this needs to be done. And that's not only a leadership task, that's a purely managerial and administration work. So please be aware what I'm seeing right now, like leadership almost, you know, like the golden sun, you know, we see finally the light. That's not it. it always goes along with administration and management. It's managerial and it's administrative. Ask any school principal what it's like to collect data when there are national exams. They don't see it as school improvement, they see it as an administrative burden. So they don't even make the connection that this data can be helpful to improve their school all along, okay? So what we could see here in a nutshell when it comes to the inspection is like the insight, you're being really meaningful, seems to be a strong driving factor in low-stakes system. It's really what we call development by insight. You finally see the relevance, you start to reflect about what you are doing, and you might reflect about it in a different way. And the different perspective on what you usually do might increase your degrees of freedom within your own profession and within your own habitat. But there are no direct effect on development activities. It's intermediate effects, and what we need to do is really to talk more about what is the role of feedback inspection. How do you feedback the data, the results? What is going to be fed back? That would be interesting to see. What are you talking about when it comes to that kind of target agreement? How does that dialogue work? Because is there an asymmetry in terms of power because you are the school inspector and there's the school principal? I mean, it would be interesting to see, do you think you are at an equal footing when you cut out that kind of target agreement and you decide what will be the next steps? Might be interesting to know. Nobody is ever there to see how that works when you are cutting out that kind of target agreement, but it's important to know more about feedback mechanisms, also not only about positive feedback, but also about really constructive feedback. There is room for improvement. Everybody can do something in a different way and in a better way. That's true for Petros Pashiardis, Stefan Brauckmann, the lady in that beautiful gray dark costume, and for all the others in the room. So context matters for data-based leadership. It remains a challenge because every school, as we call it, is a singular individual pedagogical entity. No school is like the other school, and no school inspector. I've had 400 school inspectors in that room. I can tell you are quite different from each other. There is not the standardized school inspector in Spain, and there is not the standardized school inspector in Cadiz, in Sevilla, in Valencia, in Barcelona, in Bilbao, and so on. Okay? So leave room for variation, but at the same time, think about the general framing. So it remains a challenge, it remains a determinant, and it could be a valuable resource. I skip that. So what is beyond? We should make the results accessible to different stakeholders. It should not be, tacit knowledge only for one group. So maybe, I don't know if transparency is widespread in Spain. Do you have the inspection reports for the schools online? Are they? No? Okay. Might be interesting, because they are doing it in some Bundesländer and say like, could it be actually, would you like to share those reports, okay? Or could it be like at least an option to put them online?
You have 10. Okay.
So, preparing feedback for individual schools on a regular basis and to foster really coordinative and cooperative networks. I guess the school inspectorate and a school leader, they cannot do it alone. I guess you need really allies in order to increase the acceptance for what you are doing. So maybe reaching out for more and maybe for new partners. We have in some countries in Germany, in our lenders, we have mixed inspection teams, so our parents are involved in the inspection process. I mean, that's interesting. We have mixed teams, so it's not only school inspectors. We involve different stakeholders, so to speak, in the inspection team. We call them mixed inspection teams. I'm not saying that's a good thing, because this remains to be seen. All I'm saying is an interesting idea, not only to have inspectors, but to involve different stakeholders from the community. So maybe then the school becomes even more like at the regional landscape, really relevant. This is boring. So where do we go from there? So
I think you wrote this, not me.
Well, it still is, so I blame myself. It's okay.
Okay,
so,
let's move on.
So where do we go from there? I just want you to have an understanding that there are no uniform design data-based leaders. You are individuals. I'm aware of the fact that there are national, regional, local, school-specific participants on data-based leadership, also on the availability of certain data. Some regions might have certain data. Some others might have to collect that data or come up, with an idea how to collect that data. I know that. So it pretty depends. It's context-specific. So I don't want you, to stretch you to the max. I just want you to think about what kind of data is available and in what way can it be used? What should be the function? I guess those are the main two questions. Think of what is working for you. We've been very happy that we could be here with you, and now we are willing to take the questions.
There's 2 more
Besides
slides.
that, 2 more slides?
Give me the control.
No.
That
would have been the perfect
You're
ending. That would have been the perfect
process.
ending. Okay,
No.
some final words from Petros, otherwise he would be sad.
Those I wrote just as we were coming here. But I think it's important, ladies and gentlemen, to be left with those 2 slides, if nothing else. Please read that silently, but maybe the interpreters can say it out loud. Depending on a country's stage of development, as well as depending on the education system's phase of evolution in the different contextual spaces, different definitions of success and effectiveness will be applicable, and different research themes will be considered as important. Meaning, one size does not fit all. What PISA and what other international, multinational examinations will tell us doesn't mean it's true for us. However, we, as inspectorate, as the educational experts, we need to decide what is our point of departure. Therefore, our definition of what is successful and what is effective will probably be different from what it means for Spain, or for Austria, or Germany, or for Cyprus. And we need to understand that, and we need to live with that. In a nutshell, based on what Stefan and I were saying, we've been pondering in the past 3 or 4 years now with the term edupreneurial. I guess you know where it comes from. We try artificially to pull together educational and entrepreneurial, one of those 5 leadership styles that I showed earlier, and then try to influence both the outside and the inside environment. Try as inspectorate to influence both what happens around the context of the schools as well as within the schools, and therefore become the new edupreneurial leader in order to stimulate the development of the school process by creating a community of shared responsibility between the internal and the external within the school system. And that produces the edupreneurial leader. If you're interested to know more, we recently published an article last June in the American journal Leadership and Policy in Schools, and we consider those from a philosophical, conceptual point of view, like what is the edupreneurial leader that we're probably after, and it would be more fit for today's environment. With this, we thank you, and I think now we're done, Stefan, unless there's more slides, if you want to go on.
There's one more.
Oh, you want to go on?
Yeah.
Is there?
There's one. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I forgot about that. You want to control this? Not anymore.
Thanks.
Eskerrik asko, Petros.
Eskerrik
Eta Stefan, izan da oso benetan ponentzi interesgarria, informazio asko eman duzue evaluazioaren inguruan. Como decía, pues agradecerles a Petros y a Stefan este rato que han pasado con nosotros en esta ponencia tan interesante. Nos han dado mucha información sobre la que reflexionar en torno a la evaluación. Ahora es el momento de que, si lo consideran, tienen alguna pregunta, algún tipo de reflexión, les facilitamos los micrófonos inalámbricos y comenzamos un poquito pues, la reflexión entre nosotros.
Hola. Sí, ¿se oye? Sí. Quisiera expresar primero un sentimiento y después una pregunta. Últimamente con lo que leo, con lo que he estado escuchando sobre los datos, que creo que ha sido una ponencia muy interesante, muy bien expresada y explicada, yo tengo la sensación que pudiera tener un taxista o un camionero cuando oye hablar de la investigación del coche autónomo. Mi pregunta sería la siguiente, es decir, ¿puede llegar un momento en que los datos, o se está buscando que esos datos puedan decir cómo tiene que funcionar un centro educativo?
Sorry,
Sorry, the interpreter was not able to listen. There was something wrong. So please, if you are willing to repeat your question, sorry about that. She just told us. So she couldn't interpret it.
¿Podría repetir la pregunta? Porque a la traductor no le ha dado tiempo de traducirlo. Si eres tan amable de repetirlo.
Sí, la pregunta es si con todo este desarrollo de datos podría llegar el momento en que existieran unos algoritmos que nos llevaran a, por así decir, cómo tiene que funcionar un centro educativo, sin necesidad de otro tipo de reflexión.
Wow. You want to go for this? Or?
you can have that one.
Okay. That's a very good question. I think we're getting into the robotics era, you know, or artificial intelligence and things like that. I don't know. I wouldn't like to be a prophet in this instance, but I would say that whatever we developed, models, empirical, stochastic models to tell us how much of each is good enough, etc., I think we will always need, based on those objective data, objective quote unquote, and on what the machines tell us, I think we would always need the human interpretation of what does that tell us. Actually, if I can go a bit further, when we started our research on school leadership and the leadership styles, we were really looking after creating, as we called it, the leadership cocktail mix. And then we found those 5 ingredients, as I described to you earlier. But we were also looking of how much of each is enough in order to make an effective and successful school. We didn't find that. It was nonsensical from one country to the other. There was 8 countries involved in that research project, and we had conflicting messages and results.
Within the countries even bigger.
Even within the countries, yes, as Stefan reminds me. So that would be my response. Whatever objective data, whatever formulas we may develop, we will still need the human interpretation and the human interaction because we are after a social enterprise. It's not about computers and machinery, it's about human beings. And I think when that is involved, it has to involve the human touch as well. Stefan?
Yeah, I like your question. Oh, okay. I like your question a lot, actually. What longitudinal data is showing when it comes to the decision-making process, it remains very situational and context-specific, so one situation does not resemble the other. And I guess what you have in mind, like an algorithm...
It's not working, please. This?
Well,
the micro?
Otherwise there won't be any
I'm sorry.
translation.
Hello? No? Could you? No?
Yes.
Yeah.
Gosh, okay, I tried again. Okay, sorry. I say it again, if you don't mind. So I guess like what longitudinal data is showing is like that each decision is, so to speak, context and situation specific. One situation does not resemble the other. And so I guess an algorithm which would have the power to be really context and situation specific in nature and knowing how the situation is different from the previous, you and me, we're going to see if that ever exists. But you are right that it's going to be more and more computer-based. So when it comes to process the data, And also like statistical devices we are using, of course, it's going to be more and more computer-based, and I guess it's a good thing. But when it comes to the sense-making process, and in order to see in what way the situation is slightly different, so not the same, I guess that's where, still like Petros said, the human touch and the sense-making process come. I don't know if machines can really make then the decision with all the unintended and intended effects. But we're going to see about that. I don't have the crystal ball with me, so we're going to see. But it's a very good question, right on.
Okay.
Buenos días. Si me permite.
Put it back.
¿Me oye? ¿Sí? Buenos días. Si me permite, profundizando la pregunta anterior, creo que es un elemento que falta en toda la ponencia que han tenido, que hay algunas variables que indican ese elemento o concepto que estuvo muy en boga en los años 90, finales del 90 y principios del siglo, es el concepto de autonomía de centro. Autonomía de centro. Creo que el efecto de PISA, y hay un discurso elaborado por 90 intelectuales americanos criticando a PISA, que está determinando políticas internacionales, creo que el elemento PISA ha desequilibrado el elemento, digamos, de autonomía de centro. Realmente lo que vamos a supervisar como inspectores es que un centro es capaz de tener liderazgo pedagógico, llegar a objetivos, desarrollar políticas comunitarias equilibradas en cuanto a la norma, ¿no? Y creo que el concepto de autonomía de centro, y con perdón, no está en la ponencia de ustedes. Yo les pediría que lo añadiese porque es un elemento importante para no seguir el fijismo de políticas internacionales, sino también de políticas inside de las comunidades educativas, ¿no? Desarrolladas por las propias comunidades educativas.
Got it. Okay. I can take that. Well, it was mentioned. I talked about with great power comes greater responsibility. If you are reminded now of the...
Take this off.
Sorry. Okay. Sorry, sir. So I guess thank you very much for your comment. Autonomy has been mentioned when I was using that Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility, and I was basically saying that the two sides of quality assurance and quality development in a transnational way are being characterized by more autonomy, but more autonomy is, so to speak, the twin sister of more accountability. So this discourse is an interconnected discourse. I guess that's what you want to say. It was not so prominent, because usually I talk a lot about autonomy because I'm an expert in autonomy, so I didn't want, but we can talk over pinchos about this. I would love to do this, because I think you have a good point. How much diversity and how much uniformity can a system take? We need a framework which is like binding for all, and within the framework, we need some sort of diversity. So the biggest question is can autonomy work for all schools, or maybe we should discuss a concept of the 80s with flexible decentralization, as you might be aware of the UNESCO, where they said that autonomy should be earned. It's not like autonomy as one size fits all, because schools cannot deal with that level of autonomy. So some school needs to be monitored more closely. Some schools, as a reward for being innovative, they should be granted autonomy. And we're having the same debate right now in Austria, where autonomy is it's a monolith. It's coming over and over again. But it's a different kind of autonomy right now. And the problem about autonomy is also that the autonomy of the organization can be in conflict with the autonomy of the teachers. So what do you want, the autonomy for the school or the autonomy for the single teacher in the classroom? What is better for the school in terms of quality assurance and development? I don't think that teachers should have that great level of autonomy within their classroom. I'm honest about this, because they need to be accountable to the whole school. They are not their pupils. It's not a possessive pronoun. They are pupils. They can be happy that they can teach them. So we have to talk about different levels of autonomy at different levels of the system. Was that kind of... Yeah, that was a long response, I'm sorry.
In essence, if I would like to add something to this very short one, different levels and different degrees of autonomy coupled with different degrees of accountability. The two have to go hand in hand. accountability on one end and autonomy on the other end. How much of each, however, is the threshold that we still don't know?
But in new public management, they are called the twin sisters.
Yes.
So they are the twin
are.
sisters of that
Yeah.
new steering philosophy. There's no autonomy without accountability, and there's no accountability without autonomy. Autonomy is the way. You are free to choose the pathway, but it should the pathway, to some way to a success, because you're going to be measured against your own goals, and that's good. So it's not about accountability, it's you are responsible for your actions. So maybe accountability should be replaced by responsibility. Maybe.
Bueno, primero, felicitar por la ponencia, me ha encantado, pero tengo una actitud crítica sobre un hecho que han comentado. En el tema de la evaluación por parte de los centros en la inspección, normalmente cuando es un inspector que consigue muchas cosas para el centro, muchos recursos, posiblemente tenga una actitud una empatía muy grande entre el centro y el inspector, pero si el inspector puede profundizar mucho en su inspección y en su actitud crítica respecto a la calidad y al rendimiento del centro, esa evaluación puede ser bastante nefasta. No sé cuál es el mejor sistema o el mejor método para producir esa evaluación, porque estoy de acuerdo que la evaluación tiene que ser en todos los elementos que contribuyen a la mejora del sistema, incluidos los inspectores. Pero ahí tengo algo crítico a la hora de saber cuál es el mejor sistema.
Yeah, I think you have a good point there. Thank you for your comment. When I said inspectors should be assessed or evaluated by the schools and the teachers, so to speak, that they evaluate, what is really behind that is, let's go backwards to the main principle of evaluation, that those who evaluate need to be evaluated. Now, having said that, again, it's degrees of evaluation. For instance, for Cyprus, I was chair of the committee that was formed by the Minister of Education to form a new teacher and school appraisal system for the whole education system. And one principle we instigated is that if the school leader, the school principal, gives a grade, so to speak, for the teachers at the school, then maybe 20, 30%, it's a matter of degree, of the school principal's evaluation ought to be given by the teachers. So it's not like one source controls the whole thing. So for you, if the inspectors will be evaluated by the schools and the teachers they supervise, probably a percentage of their own assessment as well can and ought to be given by those that are being inspected by you. How much of it, nobody knows. How many sources? Well, the literature tells us so far that you have to have at least 3 different sources, 3 different independent sources of data that can guide you in order to triangulate the type of evaluation and result that you will reach. So the dictum is that no one should have 100% of the process, and not one person should be controlling it. It should be at least 3 different sources. That would be my response. But I think it is a healthy attitude. Why? Because you, as the inspectors, then are accountable to the schools that expect something from you as well. And then, as they are accountable to you, and the process goes on. Yeah. Okay.
There's mixed evidence. So more accountability does not lead necessarily to more, quality improvement or assurance. It's not. It leads to more, so to speak, self-reported measures of quality improvement. But this is self-reported data by school principals, in one of the very few international comparative studies. So I guess, like they said, there's a certain bias to it. Meaning that you have more like quality development or quality-oriented development measures could be also accompanied by non-intended effects. So in high in those high-stakes countries, we see more quality-oriented improvement efforts, and at the same time, we see more of those unintended effects, which is kind of clear. If you do more, you know that you have also some unintended effects. To opt now for one or the other, it's simply not possible. You're right, there's mixed evidence. I don't say, you know, we all wait for better data now, but there's very few. That's what I was saying, that I'm so grateful that we can be here, because there are only a few studies from an international and comparative point of view on school inspector rates, and you know how they are perceived in the different countries. The biggest one was done by Melanie Ehrens together with Herbert Altrichter. You know, Austria was involved. Spain, unfortunately, was not at this time. But I guess like we need, school inspectors are heavily under-researched. That's why I'm so happy to be with 400 school inspectors, in a room. You're heavily under-researched, you're heavily under-theorized, you are way more complex, and I hope that we can grasp that complexity one day.
I think you're really what we would call, the inspectorate, virgin ground for research. Worldwide, as Stefan said, under-researched or under-theorized. So that would be a beauty to be able to do something within the Spanish inspectorate.
Don't be afraid, there are no questionnaires waiting for you if you go to lunch. No questionnaires for you. It's going to be lunch only. We didn't bring any questionnaires for you to fill out in order to have lunch, you know. Well, that's not the case. But we need more data about you. Yes.
Hola, buenos días. Bueno, viendo la mayoría de modelos de evaluación publicados, yo me he dedicado un poquito a sacar características del liderazgo innovador y efectivamente ese compromiso con un liderazgo compartido y contributivo. Se ha hablado efectivamente a partir de lo que ha comentado el compañero sobre el tema de la autonomía con responsabilidad. Se ha hablado de fomentar sinergias de equipos, se ha hablado de liderazgo cooperativo, es decir, se han hablado de temas absolutamente nucleares de cómo está ahora la doctrina. Pero me gustaría pues, compartir con los ponentes la reflexión de que efectivamente queremos maestros autocríticos, inspectores autocríticos, líderes autocríticos, porque es una de las formas más claras de fomentar la cultura de la evaluación y, por supuesto, la de la autocrítica, que es previa para generar sinergias de esa cultura de evaluación para que fuera productiva. ¿Por qué no trabajamos el concepto de liderazgo cooperativo desde la escuela? Porque lo necesitamos para la sociedad. Eso era básicamente lo que... Porque ahí está la inteligencia emocional, está la emprendeduría, pero también la capacidad de generar sinergias de autocrítica que tienen que venir desde arriba hacia abajo y desde abajo hacia arriba esa formación de los jóvenes para que en la sociedad estemos en una sociedad de la autocrítica y de la mejora. Y con autocrítica seguro que podríamos llegar, porque esto es como aquel que va a un restaurante y pide un flan y le dicen, ¿tienen flan? Y dice, sí, tenemos flan. Y dice, ¿pero lo hacen ustedes? Sí, lo hacemos nosotros. ¿Es de la casa? Sí, es de la casa, pero ¿lo hace usted con sus propias manos? Y dice, sí, lo hago yo. Y dice, pues entonces no quiero. Es decir, autonomía, pero con responsabilidad, efectivamente. Estoy totalmente de acuerdo.
I can take that. Okay. Is it working? Okay. Thank you very much for that comment. I guess like you've been mentioning distributed leadership and a delegation of tasks, and you're rightfully so, because if you're looking, so to speak, at stress-related coincidence, and what actually relieves school principals, not this time school inspectors, it's like the kind that distributed leadership and the distribution of tasks has actually a soothing effect, on school leaders. So the question would be, how can we stimulate now that kind of more distributed leadership approach? And I guess a good way to start, because I was recently asked by a big newspaper in Austria, is to integrate leadership into teacher education at the university. And I guess because teachers are the leaders of tomorrow, they are the school principals of tomorrow, but they shouldn't wait to have that position to exercise leadership, because they are leaders. There's also some now new thing about teacher leadership, but what I'm talking about is if you really try to make them more sensitive, towards the issue of leadership, then it needs to take place in a more or less institutionalized training setting. And I guess like leadership should become, as school inspection as well, because I'm teaching that for my students, and they are all teacher students, they should know what to expect from you, and they should know that they are future leaders, and that leadership, and sharing a leadership task is basically the challenge of tomorrow, and therefore you need to teach it. It comes, I guess, like it comes just too late once they are in the organization school. So maybe that could be one way, and the other way is really, why is it so hard to exercise distributed leadership style? Well, there's a power issue. Who's willing to share his power in the school? Some might be willing to share their power. Some might conceive it as a loss of power when you delegate tasks, because you're not in control, Your Highness, anymore. And some people would like to be in control. But that's not being a leader, being always in control. I totally agree with that. So we're going to see about the enabling factors of distributed leadership. But for sure, it means less stress within the organization for the single school leader. Okay.
I think I wouldn't have anything else to add on what you said, Stefan. I think I see people that are already moving. In a sense, I think they got a lot of spiritual food, so to speak, and now they need some real material food. What we try to do, I think, is really we gave you fast a lot of information and a lot of data. So that's like fast food. It is usually very tasty. However, it is difficult to digest. No laughter?
Are you disappointed?
Yes.
Yeah, so now there is. Okay. Thanks. He's better now. He's feeling better now. Okay. I would just like to point one thing out, and that's why that's the last slide. Because you are experts, a lot of researchers nowadays are on ResearchGate. ResearchGate is like a social platform for researchers all around the world. And what researchers are doing, from Spain, from Latin America, from Germany, from all over the place, they are sharing, so to speak, their information, their talks, their chapters, as a free download on ResearchGate. The reason we've been putting there, Petros and myself, we are also on ResearchGate. This is just a piece of advice, okay? I'm not saying you have to do it, but students are on ResearchGate if you want to look for information concerning the school inspectorate. There's a lot of more information out there. Maybe you just check it out on ResearchGate, get yourself an account, and then free feel to explore also the work of different researchers, and also which has been published in English, in Spanish, and so on. Okay, you're going to find lots of that stuff, but that's for now. That's just as a piece of advice where you can find more stuff for free, because you have to put it sometimes out of your own pocket, so it might be helpful. Okay? Good.
Bueno, nik uste ja badala garaia amaitzeko, ja jendeari da heltzen, joaten, eta luntxa hartzeko bete izango dugu. Digo que yo creo que ya va siendo hora de que vayamos terminando. No sé si hay alguna otra reflexión, alguna otra pregunta. Yo creo que ha sido una jornada muy, muy interesante, con muchísima información, que nos hemos ganado el lunch o la comida, yo creo que muy bien. Tenemos mucho que reflexionar. Y bueno, mañana seguiremos con la siguiente jornada. Tenemos ahora, creo, algo de Twitter, etcétera, que tiene que ver más con los medios de comunicación que otra cosa. No sé si va a subir. Y lo demás, pues muchas gracias por su atención y nos vemos mañana. Recuerden que a la tarde hay también actividades culturales para aquellos que lo deseen. Tenemos también la cena con pinchos. Eso nos lo va a recordar ahora nuestra compañera. Muchas gracias.